All right, everyone. Well, welcome back to another Timeout Tuesday podcast. And we are going to do something a little bit different today. Got some special guests in the podcast studio with me today. We got Pastor Nate, campus pastor at Bay City. How are you, Nate?
I'm well.
Yeah?
Yep.
Good. Glad to have you. And then we also have Pastor Sam Burke from Saginaw, campus pastor there. How are we doing today, Sam?
Doing good.
Yeah?
Real good.
Good. Well, what we want to do is we just concluded a series talking about women in our church, women in the Bible, and we got to have a special guest last week of a woman who works with Wycliffe. I always want to call it Wycliffe. It's Wycliffe, she informed me. So so that was our last podcast series. But what we want to do before we begin our next podcast series is we also just finished our sermon series, Life with Jesus. And so a little behind the scenes that we've talked about before, but one of the things that we do is we have a team, our creative arts team gets together and we prep all of these messages about a month out. So when the three of us are preaching and teaching and whatnot, we'll kind of walk the others through of, hey, here's where we're going, what are you seeing, all that sort of stuff. So I say all that to say, I want to spend some time talking about the series and just some of the tools that we introduced, some of the things we talked about, and knowing that you guys got to kind of sit in, or all three of us sat in at the beginning of kind of wrestling with all of these topics from the beginning, and then we just kind of completed the whole process of presenting the series. So let's begin with, having just kind of laid that out. Let me actually just recap some of the things that we talked about too, and then I'll kick it over to you guys. We kind of use this series as a reboot of our life model, right? So we talked about life with Jesus, life with people, and life with purpose. And we spent 2 weeks talking about each of them. And what we did is we kind of gave a vision week of what life with Jesus is like and why that's important. And then we did that with people and then purpose. And then on the second week, I provided a different tool that's kind of new to Hopevale that is used in discipleship by churches and parachurch ministries as a way to kind of help us along that journey. So just that's quick refresh for all of us of what we recently covered. So I'd love to start by asking you, Sam, maybe I'll come to you first, of what were some things that stood out to you during this series? Could be things that you when you were teaching, or just that you learned, or feedback we got from our congregation, things people were wrestling with, all that sort of stuff.
So two things. Personally, me, going back into the life model and diving into the life with Jesus message, it just drew me back into, if I were really, and I said this in the sermon, if I were really to go from a life transformational thing following Jesus, what would that look like in my life? And it really kind of pushed me right back into that mode I was in 3 years ago when I was journaling that. And so it was a challenge to me as even as I'm prepping and preaching, what would this life look like for me? If I would fully go after it and not kind of go, I'm already there, I'm good, kind of a thing. So it was a reminder to me that we all have opportunities to grow towards Christ.
Can I pause you right there? So you share in that sermon, from your journal that you wrote 3 years ago. It was really profound. What have you experienced? If I can just double click on your life for a second. This is what happens on this podcast. I just start asking questions. But what have you leaned into, and what have you been surprised about or seen as you look back to Sam 3 years ago writing those words? How have you taken steps in that?
Well, all those words were written pre any of the stuff that happened with our family. And so with my daughter Karis, and so the question changed drastically during those moments, because the question I think God kept asking me was, do you trust me in this? Do you trust me in this? And I would have said before that, journaling, oh, absolutely.
Sure.
I trust God. But when
it's easy when
when there's nothing at stake, and then all of a sudden the cost is up and the stakes are high, and you go, God, do I really trust you to take care of this? And I feel like that was a turning point, a big shift in my life towards, because, I'm not the only one. We're not the only ones who've ever experienced something like this, especially people of faith. And what I've seen happen is that these kind of moments can either strengthen your faith and go one way, or you can literally be in a crisis of faith.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that I never had moments of crisis of faith during
Sure.
that. There was a lot of ups and downs all the way through that journey. But at the end of the day, I was able to like, I can say today, my faith and trust in God, even though I can't explain how everything happened, is stronger, and it grew through that. And so as I reread those words, I reread them with almost fresh new eyes, going, wow, I answered almost my own questions back then. You know, would I be willing to give my life in a transformative way, even if it cost me something dearly, kind of a thing. So
Wow.
yeah, that's
That's powerful.
what I've learned, and
Yeah.
I'm still continuing to learn, you know,
Yeah.
and it's real easy to kind of put blinders on and forget that stuff. So
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I love the kind of like the full circle nature. You know, I mean, even as you say you went back and visited your journal, right? Like I think of scripture, right? And how we go back and we read different parts and it's like, oh, wow, I'm seeing this with completely new eyes. I never
Yeah.
saw this before. And so
Exactly.
like Sam still said those words years ago and meant them genuinely,
Yeah.
right? Like was wrestling with that. And then it's like, wow, after this whole experience, now I've got something completely new
Yep.
and how I'm evaluating all of this.
Absolutely. And it caused me to read different parts of scripture differently, and to see God in a different light in my family's life, in my life. And it raised the spiritual temperature of myself and our family. And I think it gave me kind of, and I preached on this once before, but it gave me a new perspective in seeing people.
Sure.
Especially people who are far from God, and wanting them to understand who Jesus is, and compassion for them. Like people who didn't even know Christ were lovingly and compassionately taking care of our family and my kids. So it was
That's
just
awesome.
like, whoa, this is cool.
Yeah.
So that was really cool to revisit. And then the second thing that I've seen in our congregation is one of the big talking points at the Saginaw campus was when we talked about grace and truth. We just heard that over and over again, and people wrestling with, I'm more of a grace person, I need more truth. I'm more of a truth person.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I've heard more is I'm more of a truth person, I need more grace. Me personally, I'm probably more of a grace person.
Okay.
And I need to probably be a little stronger on certain things. But yeah, it's fun to hear people wrestle with that, but actually hear like them say statements of life transformation, like, I need to work on this. Or
Sure.
Christ is working on this in me.
Yeah.
And then I can't wait to see what happens with that. So
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. All right. Let's swing it over to you, Nate. What did you kind of take away from it? What are things that stood out to you, maybe even spoke to you personally, challenged you?
I think it was the tools. As a church, and maybe as the Big C church, not just Hopevale, but all churches, I think we're good at talking about the what and even the why of faith, but we're not as good at talking about the how. This is how you do it. And I think the tools that you introduced really speak to the how. And I think that's important for people, like to speak to what you're saying about life change. That's when lives change. It's when it moves from an idea or a concept to something that actually changes the decisions that you make and how you live your life. So to me, I loved us giving people tools to take this stuff that we're talking about in theory and help them actually use it in practice. So I thought all the tools that we introduced were really, really strong.
Yeah. I should probably circle back and say, so we introduced the triangle, talking about our identity, right? And how we kind of work that the opposite way sometimes and try and think that through our obedience, then we can earn God's favor. Then we talked about the grace and truth, which Sam kind of just talked about. But this learning of calibrating that really, if we're just truth people or just grace people, we're missing out on the opportunity to enter in. And it was kind of a follow-up to your message, Nate, of doing life with people, right? Of we are messy people, we are broken people, and so we're going to need to calibrate both those things. We need that in our life. And then the third one was talking about evangelism, right? And how do we calibrate being highly connected to people, but still highly, still high challenge. So if we're high connection, high relationship, high invitation on one side, kind of that grace side, right? And then if on the other side we're high challenge, high responsibility, all of that sort of stuff, how do we calibrate both of those? And we run risk of I think a lot of times, and I even said, in the sermon, like the hard part in evangelism is we feel like it's so difficult to enter in. Like we want to do it.
Yeah.
Right? We know we have this compelling message, but the tools that we've been handed are either more like shame tactics or coercive, argue you into the kingdom was one way, or I was given like this idea of, more youth group when I was, let's bring them to the expert. We're going to have this hour and a half event or all night event or whatever it is. We're going to load them with sugar and caffeine and all this stuff. And your job is to bring them to the expert. Or it was more of like osmosis evangelism, right? Like, hey, maybe if they're just around me enough, I don't have to actually be any different or just nothing distinct about me. And so again, just on that matrix, learning how do we calibrate that even in evangelism. I think it's actually quite natural. And once you like see it, you're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. Like this is so simple, but we build it up into this formula and all of these things that we're supposed to be doing, or, working people through an argument to get them to our point, as opposed to really just getting to a place of saying, where's God at work in this? Where's the good news for this person? How can I unearth that for them? How can I present that to them? Because people want to respond to good news. We have lots of bad news and brokenness and pain and suffering in our world, and the gospel meets us in that and calls us to life and life to the full. So, all right. So I jumped in because I forgot I was going to give that little recap of those tools.
Yeah.
But then you were sharing.
No, like I don't know about Saginaw, but every time you shared a tool in Bay City, there were phones out, like taking pictures of the tool on the screen and like people zooming in, try to get a good picture.
Sure.
But it obviously resonated with people. And I think like if you take them in order, if you circle back to the identity triangle, right? That was the first tool we shared, or that you shared. That's, I think, really, really powerful. Spiritual identity is a huge thing to me. And it was an important thing in my spiritual growth and development, was understanding my identity in Jesus. So I think, especially the way you broke that down, where on one side of it, which would be a little more of a legalism angle of things, you have fear and bondage leading to shame, right? Versus what we believe life with Jesus actually is, which is grace and freedom that leads to love.
Right.
And I think that, I know based on conversations that I had with people that our groups in Bay City ended up having, as they discussed the sermon later in the week, that cycle of fear and bondage and then shame is something that I think is a real part of the cultural narrative around this area, and something that I think a lot of people have grown up in, where that was their experience of religion, not necessarily faith, but their experience of religion is that, I'm in service of an angry God, that.
Sure.
And so this is the cycle that I'm used to, where I don't measure up to what I think I'm supposed to do. And then I feel like God's disappointed at me or angry with me or whatever. So I felt like that tool was really, really powerful. Were people taking pictures in Saginaw too of this?
I mean, it's fewer and far between, but definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then to me, the second tool was also really good when you were talking about the grace and truth matrix. And I know for me, the word that really stuck out was the fourth quadrant, which is kind of where we want to be, which you started talking about imagining. And it's just, for me on a personal level, forget what all was happening in the room, just on a personal level, that piece of it, I think maybe was the single biggest, most important piece of the whole series. Was like, I've heard some people describe that as a believer, you need to live in the tension of grace and truth. And if you don't feel tension, you're doing it wrong. Right. So it's like, whatever direction you're going in, if it's just, I feel nothing but grace and I don't feel any sense of needing to bring truth into this relationship or this conversation or whatever the situation, or the flip of that, like, man, this person just needs truth.
Sure.
Like unabashed truth all the time. And I don't feel any pull towards grace, then I'm doing it wrong. But I don't know if that's the right way to operate. If our goal is love, to me, that imagining really captured this state of, no matter what situation I find myself in, relationship situation, whatever, I can just say, what is the most loving thing I can do for this person? And that will, to use your word, calibrate it, right? Because then the most loving thing at all times will be grace and truth, right? And so something you've talked about in messages before, where it's like, if I don't understand something, instead of reacting hostily towards the person or the situation, instead, what if we get curious about it and start asking questions? And so that concept of, when I find myself in these relationships or situations, imagining and, kind of putting it in different words, like, what is the most loving thing that I could do right now?
Yeah. I want to hop in on that.
Yeah.
So one of the things I didn't have the opportunity in that sermon of Grace and Truth to talk about, which we did talk about, I won't put you all to the test, but we did talk about in a staff meeting when I introduced this tool, is the interesting thing with calibrating Grace and Truth is it's not always, like, I love how you're framing that, Nate, of what is the most loving thing for this situation. And sometimes the most loving thing actually is just grace. And sometimes it is just truth. And it's learning to navigate that. So an example I use in the training is to think about a kid's sports team, right? And so my kids are doing basketball right now through the township or whatever. And, they're young. And so loving them means it's really just trying to control chaos, because most of the kids there don't understand. I'm quite certain that some don't even understand we're playing basketball actually on their team, right? But there's this sense where it actually needs to be a little bit more of a cozy environment for them when they're starting out, because they're just learning the game. They're just there to have fun. They're, it's a way to get exercise. They're learning how to be social. Like, there's lots of other things happening than just playing to win the game. Now, there's some teams that come that are clearly just trying to win the game, right? But as you think about that, like that is them kind of actually living down in the or up in the grace only culture, right? But if you were to only stay there, my boys will eventually become quite frustrated with that. Like, as I think about my own, like, kind of sports legacy, some people have said, all right, that might be a little strong word. Well, there's bad legacies. There's really untold legacies, unnecessary legacies, all sorts of different legacies.
We love you don't have to explain. We love the confidence. Just keep going.
Sam's the big time basketball player here, so we can default to his legacy. I think of, eventually, though, you have to move out of that cozy environment of just grace. Like, you actually need it at the beginning, but and it wouldn't have been helpful for my second grader to go to a coach that's all truth, just yelling at him and running like a little, I don't know, some sort of military basketball camp. Like, he would just be overwhelmed. But also for him to develop and to grow, he's going to need more truth. And then you move up and you maybe start doing travel teams, and you're getting more of that. So even all that to say, there is this sense of calibrating at different moments does require, if you guys have sat and counseled people, right? So it's like, there's times when I'm counseling people where it's like, oh, this person literally is just going to need grace for like a year. We can't even really get to laying out much truth here, because there's so much damage that has been done and harm and things that they're going to have to walk through. Like, they figuratively just need a hug for the next year, someone who they can walk through life with. But then you get to other people and it's like, all right, you need to start taking some steps here. And, and it's a little bit, so anyways, all that to say, there is this sense of, it's not clear cut of love just means only, it's a perfect calibration 50-50. It's actually understanding the reality of the context and what is God doing in this person's life. And then now how do I lead them to grace and truth?
Right. The way I heard it expressed that I really grabbed onto several years ago is that Jesus is always working to draw people near to the Father at all times. You never have to figure out what Jesus is doing. In any situation, he's always at work to draw people near to the Father. So part of that calibration, it can just simply be imagining what is it that Jesus is doing in the life of this person to draw them near to the Father. And when we view situations in that way, if it's someone that has hurt me or done something hurtful to me, or a problematic relationship or whatever it is, if I go into it with eyes to see what he is at work doing in that person's life to draw them near to the Father, then I can then just cooperate with what he's doing instead of what do I want them to get out of this?
Right.
How do I want their behavior to change? How do I want them to be different? Instead, it's, even though it may be hard for me on the surface to figure it out, Jesus is working in this to draw them to our Heavenly Father. So if that's true, and I believe it is, then how do I cooperate with them? And then it helps to calibrate that, where it's like, all right, then I can leave my own desires to the side. I can set aside my own ambitions for this person and instead just join Jesus in what he's already doing.
Yeah, and then that I mean, so perfectly played into talking about evangelism, right? Because then it just becomes, again, this natural, relational type evangelism that really we are just trusting God is present, he's at work. How do I name that for this person? How do I unearth that? How do I dig that out for them and present it to them and invite them into it? So, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love the fact that love is the goal. I thought of, it was funny, like you guys were talking, I thought of my high school basketball coach because there were times as a senior especially where he would have to correct stuff I was doing. And he was like a college basketball player, so I looked up to him. And every time he corrected me, I never questioned like where I stood with him because he made it clear, like, you know, I had his favor, but he never shied away from correcting me in the middle of it. And so it was like that was the most loving thing he could have done. For him to just kind of ignore it would not have helped me at all. For him to just yell and scream at me and then bench me or whatever would not have helped me at all. It was that both andness that showed that's love. That when I think about love, it's this both andness of, you know, no one questions where they stand with you or with God, and yet the truth still is there, you know.
Yeah.
Because that's that whole idea of grace. I think a lot of times we think grace is this soft thing. And no, it's a favor thing, right? It's this unmerited favor.
Right.
And so people don't have to question where they stand with you, and you can still be truthful with them,
Right.
you know, so.
Yeah, and that's like a perfect tee up too of where we're going next sermon series, right? We're going to be talking about Jonah and this idea that God is relentlessly pursuing his people, that people for him always have value and they are worth pursuing. And that happens through his prophet and through the people of Nineveh. And so there's always this there's this potential in all people, all of humanity that we can unlock. So love that little tease for where we're going. So, all right. So let's let me ask you maybe one more question. Just having been through this series, going through the different tools, all of that sort of stuff, what are you excited for us as a church moving forward? Can be specific at your campus or based off of some of the conversations you've shared. But after we've spent 6 weeks looking at Jesus' life, how Jesus' life, we've been trying to figure out how do we embody his teachings, how do we disciple, apprentice him. Moving forward, what are you hoping to see from our church in the days ahead?
What I'm seeing currently and what I love is it feels like someone, maybe it was you, maybe it was all of us, maybe it's just the Holy Spirit, taking that temperature gauge, the spiritual temperature gauge, and turning it up. The conversations feel different with people. There's more introspection. There's more, okay, how do I grow as a follower of Christ, which I think is really great.
Yeah.
And the focus on discipleship, not being just another like, oh, I went to this Bible study or I did this, but it's actually this life thing.
Yeah.
I think is really becoming evident. So I have this opportunity, I shared this in the e-bulletin last week, but to mentor this guy, Zach, and to watch that happen on a micro level. And if that could happen on a macro level with our people, just that spiritual temperature going up, it would be awesome to see where this is going to go. And to have actual tools that they can actually use like practically with one another to help each other grow. I think that's going to be an incredible thing. So I can't wait to see the results of all of this.
Yeah.
But
it's that idea. I think the word that we use that I think is a really powerful word is embody. The embodying of the teachings of Jesus. I think if we can do that, if we can just all in an intentional way embody one teaching of Jesus this year, you know, and not just know what he teaches, but live what he teaches, man, that unlocks all kinds of potential of taking heaven into people's lives. So I love that. And then along with that, I think I'm really excited for our people to dive into relational evangelism. We talk about that number, and we've talked about it over and over again, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but those 300,000 friends and neighbors that don't know Jesus personally, that number can be overwhelming. But if we tackle it one relationship at a time, then it's far less overwhelming. And I think, I grew up in a church that did all kinds of evangelism. I've done street corner evangelism. I've done, knocking on doors and going door to door to do evangelism, and been trained in, at least 5 different evangelism methods. Relational evangelism is the most natural and beautiful way to embody the teachings of Jesus when it comes to sharing his love with our friends and neighbors. And anyone can do it, right? It's just allowing Jesus to step into that space of the relationships that he's given us and the people that he's placed us with. Absolutely. And so that's the piece that I'm really excited about, is as we take that concept of relational evangelism and then we move forward with it, even into the next series that we'll talk about again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even a step further, this year, 2024, we're about to enter into a pretty embattled political season.
Yeah.
Nah, you don't think so, do you? Surely not.
What's happening this year?
What a time. Just think about it. What a time to be the embodied disciples of Christ.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where we can offer a better way than whatever is being offered to us. And so it's a call. It's a challenge. It's a raising of a bar to step up and be Christ in our communities, in our world.
There's not going to be a better back curtain to the beauty of Jesus than this year.
Yeah.
So all these things that we're going to experience, which we will see, the media try to divide. We will see contention between parties and
fear.
We will see all of those things. Yeah. So if we think of all of those things as a backdrop upon which we can contrast all of that with who Jesus is and what his disciples that are embodying his teachings function as, man, on one hand, it'd be like, I cannot believe we're going into this, not again. Another one of these. But instead, we can embrace it and say, may we truly embody who Jesus is to our friends and neighbors. May we give a picture of unity in diversity within our church. May we allow him to use this year to say, this is what the world offers, is everything you're seeing out there, but Jesus has a better way, Absolutely.
I was just thinking as you both were sharing, I think sometimes we're like, well, what would God say to my neighbor? Or if God were to give a message to my neighborhood or my city or my township or whatever it may be, Bay City, Saginaw. And I think the answer to that is you, right? If we are the embodiment of Christ, you are the letter, you are the message that he is sending. So then that raises the bar, the question that you guys are touching on of so what message am I sending? If I am what God has to say to my neighbor, then what is my neighbor hearing? And I think that is going back to imagining, right? And envisioning, that is both a calibration of high truth and grace of we are naming that people need Jesus in their life. Then we're naming that I, as a Jesus follower, need to be Jesus in their life. Not with a savior complex or, taking his place, but as his representative. That's our role. We are ambassadors, Paul will say. We are created in the image of God. We are to image him in all that we do. So I love that. Were you about to say something, Sam? Oh, okay. I thought
just nodding along with you. And that's great. Love it.
Well,
exactly what I'd say.
It's been a fun journey for the last 6 weeks, and like I said, we're moving on into Jonah, and we're going to be talking about this relentless God that is pursuing people because people have potential, and so we're going to continue to press into this. We're going to continue to talk about it. We're going to continue to be salt and light and figure out how do we be that backdrop in this world that has a better story to tell. And good news is we don't have to create that. We just have to figure out how to tell the story of what Jesus is doing in our life. So exciting days ahead. Glad to have you guys both along. Thanks for joining in on the conversation. And next week, Pastor Sam and I will be back. We'll be talking about Jonah. We're going to be doing a deeper dive for the next few weeks over Jonah. So it'll be a good time. Well, with that, hope you have a great week. We'll see you Sunday. And if not, just know that we're bummed we didn't see you. We're a little upset about it, but that's all right. We'll be fine. Peace to you either way.